We need a replacement pilot right now. The rescue team looked around desperately. Their backup pilot was hours away. No one was qualified to handle a Black Hawk in these mountain conditions. One soldier whispered, "Wait, that mechanic, didn't she used to fly helicopters?" All eyes turned to the woman wiping grease off her hands beside the Jeep. She said only one thing, "Give me 3 minutes to change." Meet Marissa Lane, 38 years old, once a UH-60 Black Hawk pilot who left the military after losing her team in 2015. She moved to a small mountain town and took a job as a civilian airport mechanic, fixing engines, cleaning landing strips, never revealing her past. The locals only knew her as blunt, quiet. The woman who doesn't like small talk. A few reserve soldiers training nearby would joke behind her back, "There goes the grounded pilot." Marissa never reacted. She just worked, wiping oil, checking technical specs every morning at dawn. Once an officer asked, "Have you ever flown before?" She simply replied, "Flying is something I left behind." But nobody knew that every night she still adjusted old Black Hawk electrical diagrams in her garage. The townspeople saw her as just another quiet worker, someone who kept to herself, spoke only when necessary, and seemed content with simple manual labor. They had no idea that behind those oil-stained hands lay years of precision flying experience. No clue that the woman who changed their car tires had once navigated combat zones under enemy fire. The local diner owner would sometimes say, "Marissa's reliable, but she's got secrets." You can see it in her eyes. Kids would watch her work and wonder why she always looked up at the sky when helicopters passed overhead. Why her hands would pause mid-repair, following the aircraft's path until it disappeared. The reserve soldiers' jokes weren't entirely wrong. She was grounded, but not because she couldn't fly, because she chose not to. Every piece of machinery she touched worked perfectly afterward. Every engine she serviced ran smoother than before. Her technical knowledge seemed almost supernatural to the other mechanics. "She knows things we don't," they'd whisper, like she's worked on military equipment before. But Marissa never confirmed or denied anything. She clocked in, did her job with exceptional skill, and went home to her small apartment above the auto shop. The town's annual air show would bring military demonstrations. Marissa always worked late those days, avoiding the crowds and the memories they triggered. What they didn't know was that she still held an active pilot's license, still maintained her certifications in secret, still dreamed in the language of rotor blades and altitude readings. She wasn't hiding from her past. She was protecting everyone from what it might demand of her again. A rescue training team was using a UH-60 for drills in the nearby mountains. Their primary pilot suddenly collapsed mid-flight, unconscious from a medical emergency. The helicopter lost stability immediately. Automatic systems failed to respond due to backup system malfunctions. Emergency landing was mandatory, but no one aboard had the skill to control the aircraft in high-wind mountain terrain. The base called for backup support, but the nearest qualified flight crew was hours away. Lieutenant Torres, who had trained with Marissa 12 years earlier, suddenly remembered there might be one person who could help. "I know someone," he said quietly, "but she doesn't wear the uniform anymore." The Jeep raced through town. Torres found Marissa replacing spark plugs in the small garage. The moment she looked up, she said, "I know. Someone needs to be brought home safely, right?" No questions asked. She walked inside to change clothes. The old jumpsuit with flight crew insignia reappeared after 5 years of storage. When she emerged at the airfield, the people who had once dismissed her stood in stunned silence. The situation was critical. The disabled helicopter was losing altitude over rocky terrain. The unconscious pilot needed immediate medical attention, and the aircraft was running low on fuel. Standard protocol required a highly experienced pilot for this type of rescue operation. Mountain flying in emergency conditions was among the most dangerous maneuvers in aviation. Torres briefed her quickly. Unstable weather, narrow landing zone, injured personnel aboard, the kind of mission that ends careers if it goes wrong. Marissa nodded, studying the weather patterns and terrain maps with the focused intensity of someone who had done this countless times before. "What's the wind situation?" she asked, already calculating approach angles in her head. "Gusting up to 40 knots, crosswinds from the northeast." "Visibility? 2 miles, cloud ceiling dropping." She absorbed every detail, cross-referencing it with her mental database of similar rescue scenarios. This wasn't just about flying. It was about bringing people home alive. The assembled soldiers watched her transformation. The quiet mechanic was gone. In her place stood a pilot with the calm confidence that only comes from facing life-and-death situations regularly. "How long since your last flight?" someone asked nervously. "The helicopter doesn't forget," she replied. "It just waits for the right hands to guide it." As she walked toward the waiting Black Hawk, her posture changed completely. Every step showed purpose. Every movement displayed the muscle memory of hundreds of previous missions. The aircraft sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its rotor blades still and silent. But Marissa looked at it like greeting an old friend. This wasn't just about proving herself to skeptical onlookers. Lives hung in the balance. The unconscious pilot needed medical care. The crew aboard the disabled aircraft needed someone who could navigate impossible conditions. She climbed into the cockpit and began her pre-flight checklist. Each switch, each gauge, each control surface, all exactly where they should be. "Tower, this is Rescue 1. She spoke into the radio with professional calm. "Request immediate clearance for emergency medical evacuation." The controller's voice crackled back. "Rescue 1, you're cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." Marissa stepped into the UH-60, checking every switch and sensor with methodical precision. She needed no co-pilot assistance. Her hands remembered every control, every rotor adjustment. A soldier strapping himself in asked nervously, "It's been a while since you've flown. You sure you're still good?" Marissa replied, "Helicopters don't forget anyone. They just wait for someone to fly them right." The aircraft lifted off smoothly. She navigated through mountain passes with strong crosswinds, reading the terrain with her naked eye rather than relying on GPS. This was where her years of combat flying showed. Modern pilots depended heavily on instruments and automated systems. Marissa flew by instinct, feeling the aircraft's responses through her hands and feet. The disabled helicopter came into view, hovering unsteadily near a narrow ridge. Its inexperienced temporary pilot was fighting the controls, burning fuel rapidly. "This is Rescue 1, she radioed. "I have visual on your aircraft. Maintain current position while I assess landing options." The terrain below offered no easy solutions. Rocky outcroppings, steep slopes, and unpredictable wind patterns created a nightmare scenario for any pilot, but Marissa had landed in worse places. Afghanistan had taught her to find landing zones where none seemed to exist. She identified a small clearing barely wider than her rotor span. The approach would require threading between two rock formations with less than 10 feet of clearance on either side. "Rescue 1, that LZ looks too tight," came the worried voice from the ground controller. "Copy that," Marissa responded calmly. "I've landed in tighter spots." She brought the Black Hawk into a steep approach, using the mountain wind to her advantage. The aircraft descended at an angle that would have terrified most pilots, but she maintained perfect control. The landing was textbook perfect. Soft touchdown, minimal dust cloud. Rotors stopped within inches of the rock walls. The rescue team moved quickly, transferring the unconscious pilot to her aircraft. His vital signs were stable, but he needed immediate hospital care. During the medical transfer, she kept the rotor blades spinning at precise RPMs, ready for immediate takeoff. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. The return flight presented different challenges. Carrying a medical patient meant smoother flying was essential, but the weather was deteriorating rapidly. She found a route through the valleys that avoided the worst turbulence, adding 10 minutes to the flight time, but ensuring her patient's stability. "How did you know about that route?" Torres asked over the intercom. "I've studied these mountains for 5 years, she replied. "Every mechanic should know the terrain they might need to fly over." The comment revealed something important. She had never stopped being a pilot. Even while working as a mechanic, she had maintained her situational awareness and local knowledge. As they approached the hospital landing pad, emergency medical teams waited with stretchers and equipment. The precision of the operation impressed everyone watching. She set the helicopter down with barely a bump. The medical team rushed forward, but they paused when they saw the pilot who had executed the flawless rescue. "Who is that?" asked the chief flight surgeon. "The airport mechanic," Torres replied. "Turns out she's been fixing our helicopters from the outside and flying them in her head." Word spread quickly through the military community. The quiet woman who had been changing oil and replacing parts was actually one of the most skilled pilots they had ever seen operate. When she shut down the engines and removed her helmet, her hair was pulled back in the same simple ponytail she wore while working on cars, but her eyes held the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just saved a life. A brigadier general who had witnessed the entire operation approached her as she completed her post-flight checklist. "We just let someone like you clean engines for 5 years without knowing what we had," he said quietly. Marissa looked at him with the same expression she gave everyone: calm, professional, unimpressed by rank or recognition. "I wasn't cleaning engines," she corrected. "I was staying ready." Marissa didn't request to return to active duty. She went back to the garage and continued fixing cars. But every weekend, she taught basic flying skills to young trainees, free of charge. A small sign appeared in the garage: "Not every pair of wings needs a medal." The child who once asked his father, "Why does she know how to fly?" now stood in her weekend classes, learning about aerodynamics and aircraft systems. The UH-60 crew installed a small inscription on their aircraft's side: "Flying is about courage, not rank." In town, nobody called her the quiet mechanic anymore. People whispered respectfully, "She once saved 20 people with those oil-stained hands." But Marissa remained unchanged. She still arrived at work early, still performed every repair with meticulous care, still looked up when helicopters passed overhead. The difference was in how others saw her. The reserve soldiers who once joked behind her back now sought her advice on technical matters. Local pilots asked her opinion on weather conditions and flight planning. She had become the unofficial aviation expert for the entire region, yet she never advertised her services or charged for consultations. Young people from surrounding towns began showing up at her weekend flying lessons. Word had spread about the mechanic who could teach them skills they couldn't learn anywhere else. "Why don't you go back to flying full-time?" a student asked one Saturday morning. "I never stopped flying," she replied, tapping her temple. "I just choose when to leave the ground." Her garage became an informal gathering place for aviation enthusiasts. Military personnel, civilian pilots, and aviation students would stop by to discuss technical problems or share flying stories. She listened more than she spoke, but when she offered advice, everyone paid attention. Her suggestions were always practical, always focused on safety, always based on real experience. The town's annual air show began featuring a special ceremony honoring local aviation heroes. Marissa was always invited to speak, but she consistently declined. Instead, she worked the event as a volunteer, directing traffic and ensuring aircraft were properly maintained. The organizers learned to schedule her students' demonstration flights, knowing she would be there to oversee every detail. "She's not hiding anymore," Torres observed one day. "She's just being herself, someone who serves without needing applause." The rescued pilot made a full recovery. He visited Marissa's garage months later to thank her personally. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You would have done the same," she replied, not looking up from the engine she was repairing. But that evening, neighbors noticed her standing outside longer than usual, watching the sunset and listening to the distant sound of helicopters heading home. Some people choose silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have already done enough talking through their actions. Marissa didn't need recognition or medals. She needed to know that when someone was in danger, she could help bring them home safely. In every community, there are talented people hiding in plain sight. They work quietly, serve without fanfare, and wait for the right moment to do what needs to be done. When others panic, they take action. When someone falls, they don't turn away. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They might be the pilot you need when every other option has failed. The most important skills aren't always displayed on resumes or worn on uniforms. Sometimes they're carried in the hearts and hands of people who have chosen to serve in different ways. True heroism doesn't require an audience. It just requires someone willing to step forward when lives are on the line. Look around your own community. The quiet mechanic, the reserved teacher, the unassuming neighbor. They might be carrying skills and experiences that could change everything when the moment demands it. The best pilots aren't always the ones wearing wings. Sometimes they're the ones keeping other people's wings in perfect working order